Good afternoon. I'm Courtney Graham with the Engagement Programs team here at the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome to today's virtual conversation, Rethinking the 17th Century Dutch Galleries. We're so glad to have you all joining us virtually. And while we hope this digital format can be a chance to stay connected to the Art Institute from home. We'll begin with a brief review of some of the features we'll be using today. This program will be shared in presentation mode, so we have turned off video and microphones for attendees. For optimal viewing, please select full screen mode under the view options in the top right corner of your screen. Throughout the presentation, you're invited to share questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We look forward to answering some of those at the end of the presentation. Closed captions are available and can be turned on via the controls at the bottom of the screen as well. If you encounter any technical difficulties during today's program, again, please let us know in the Q&A and we'll do our best to assist you. This program is being recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it in the future, you'll be welcome to do so. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Jacquelyn Coutré is the Eleanor Wood Prince Associate Curator of Painting and Sculpture of Europe. Jonathan Tavares is our Associate Curator of Applied Arts of Europe. And Jamie Gabbarelli is the Prince Trust Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings. Thank you all so much for being here. I will now hand things over to Jacquelyn to get us started.
Thank you very much, Courtney. It has been thrilling to reinstall the Dutch galleries after a hiatus of 20 months with the exhibitions El Greco, Ambition and Defiance, and Visa Butler Portraits on view in the galleries of painting and sculpture in Europe. Much of the early modern collection was off view in 2020 and 2021. This new iteration of the Dutch galleries offered us an exceptional opportunity to present strategic acquisitions and loans, to revisit paintings long held in storage, and to develop new interpretive strategies, all of which expand the narratives that we can tell in our galleries. The collection of 17th century Dutch paintings had previously occupied Gallery 213, as well as a portion of Gallery 212, and it shared the more intimate corridor space with prints and drawings, and this area is designated in purple on the screen. Now, with the addition of new works and the collaboration with Applied Arts of Europe, the collection of 17th century works extends fully across these two galleries, as well as in the corridors. In 2013, we sought to present the paintings of the Dutch Republic as emblematic of this nascent state, a state that self-identified as Protestant and mercantile, one that sought to create its own visual tradition after breaking free of 80 years of tyrannical Spanish rule. The migration of peoples within the Low Countries around 1600 resulted in a flourishing art market. Researchers believe that between 5 and 10 million paintings were created in the Dutch Republic during the 17th century, and some of the most pioneering types are on view here. Anchoring this gallery are our splendid Old Man with a Gold Chain by Rembrandt van Rijn, A Boy Blowing on a Firebrand by Gerrit van Honthorst, and Landscape with the Ruins of the Castle of Egmont by Jacob van Ruysdael. Hung in our galleries for the first time is Venus, Ceres, and Cupid by Cornelis van Haarlem, which is monogrammed and dated 1604. It depicts the ancient Roman adage, without food and drink, love grows cold, here interpreted through Venus and Ceres in human form and Bacchus in the grapes that Ceres holds. This painting demonstrates Cornelis's command of the female nude, the supreme marker of artistic achievement in the early modern period. In the supple folds of flesh, the heavily lowered eyelids with a dreamy element to them, and the diaphanous garment. With its sumptuous palette, it simply glows on the walls. But Cornelis did not wholly idealize these figures. Rather, he rooted them in nature by including such subtle details as the blue veins in the breasts and the dirt under the fingernails of Ceres. When juxtaposed with Paulus Moreels's Portrait of a Young Lady and a painting of Vulcan by Hendrik Goltzius, which is on loan to us, The Cornelius painting participates in a visual dialogue about the pursuit of an almost hyper-realistic depiction of the human body and its adornment. Another new acquisition is a vanitas still life by Edward Collier, which is also signed and dated. It is a fantastic example of the book still life, a subgenre of painting that emerged in the highly literate Republic in the early 1620s. The painting reproduces real-life documents, including Frederick de Witt's engraved world map of 1660, the title page of Petrus Scriberius's Ancient History of Holland, published in 1612, and the terrestrial and celestial globes fabricated by Judicus Hondius around 1615, which are turned to display the Americas. But it is the framework surrounding these symbols of Dutch possession that is key. Here, the extinguished candle, the hourglass, and the instruments and psalm books that produce short-lived notes are signals of vanitas, a context that alludes to the meaninglessness of worldly pursuits. This framework therefore calls into question whether Collier was glorifying Dutch colonialism or condemning it. After all, by the time this painting was produced in 1662, the Dutch had lost or were in the process of losing their territories in the Americas, suggesting that while new knowledge is documented with an ostensible permanence through printing, the actual governance of these new lands could be, and was for the Dutch, fleeting. When positioned in conversation with food still lifes and our absolutely exquisite trompe-l'oeil still life with a flower garland and a curtain, by Adrian van der Spelt and Frans van Mieris, a collaboration, a fascinating discussion about the pleasures of deceiving the eye is created. Next to the Collier in Gallery 212 is a loan from a very generous supporter, a still life by Willem Claes Heda, which shows silver chargers, glass vessels, and ewer and oyster shells strewn across the table. The symphony in silvers, grays, and browns demonstrates the tendency towards a monochromatic palette in the 1630s and 1640s. One hears monochromatic and one may be tempted to think simplistic, but this approach enabled Heda to demonstrate his virtuosity in depicting illumination and materiality. The reflection on the body of the ewer, for example, is absolutely stunning. This reinstallation has also given us the opportunity to bring some paintings out of storage, including Man with a Tankard at a Window by Adrian van Ostade, which has not been on display in recent history and has been called the follower of Adrian van Ostade in the past. This image of a man engages the viewer with his casual, chummy comportment. It is a small work and can be maximally enjoyed in the corridor, where a visitor can truly take in the nuances of his expression and posture and the picturesque details of the dilapidated building. Beyond adding new or rarely seen works to the galleries, we've engaged in new interpretive strategies, including installing introductory panels. The one in Gallery 213 presents the political entities of the Dutch Republic and the Spanish Netherlands as a means of grounding the visitor in this historical moment, and thereby articulating some of the differences between Dutch and Flemish art. It is accompanied by a map to further clarify these historical geographies. The panel in 212 emphasizes the fierce competition on the open market that fueled talented artists to develop new approaches and to specialize within a specific genre of painting. It also acknowledges that the prosperity of this new republic derived from its seafaring activities, including the trade in enslaved peoples. In addition to the introductory panels, we have sought to be more transparent about one charmingly elusive attribution. The iconic young woman at an open half door is signed and dated Rembrandt 1645, but it is currently called Rembrandt and Workshop. It has been installed alongside an interactive feature on an iPad, exploring the painting's successive attributions over time. Using technical and stylistic evidence, this feature pulls back the curtain on the act of connoisseurship. One final interpretive strategy can be seen in Gallery 212, which, as mentioned earlier, recognizes the Dutch Republic's position as a global power. It identifies the presence of foreign and foreign-inspired commodities within paintings as evidence of the country's international stature. The integration of this case of applied arts among the paintings reinforces the real-world connections that these painters sought to make. That is, to represent the details of 17th century life as faithfully as possible. And Jonathan will speak further to this in a moment. In closing, reimagining the Dutch galleries was a collaborative effort, and I want to thank Jonathan and Jamie for their impeccable collegiality and their outstanding selection of objects, as well as the curatorial administrators, specialists, and designers who made this reinstallation possible. And now, Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacquelyn. Thank you. It really was a wonderful collaboration. When we first started talking about the collaboration for a case of objects for this Gallery 212, I was thinking about our collection of still lives and genre paintings and what objects they depict, particularly this one by Peter Klaas. As a curator of applied arts or decorative arts and material culture, naturally, I find myself drawn to these Dutch 17th century paintings. They do capture an idealized heightened reality, but nevertheless depict the material wealth blossoming in the fledgling Dutch Republic in the wake of independence from Spain and booming trade. These pictures encapsulate a growing consumer society, a thriving middle class that wanted to celebrate their newfound wealth with objects as well as, well, parties. A consumer society that gave birth to what we today might identify with. The first object that came to my mind in storage at the time that, like this painting, so encapsulated this consumer culture was this glass beaker. The form of the glass with its knobby base or prunts in the shape of berries was designed to give the drinker a firm hold of the delicate glass. When filled with red wine, those berries would turn a natural looking color like raspberries. The engraved Latin epigram too, around the bowl of it also would become more visible. Taken from the 1st century AD Roman poet Martial, it states, "It's a crime to spoil or to mix Valerian wine to serve to your guests. It is a warning not to hold back your best." Quality mattered and needed to be seen both in the wine or tasted in the wine, as well as seen in the objects that served it. Relating to calligraphy at the time in the mid 17th century, there was a popular hobby among this new middle class, new middle upper class, to use a diamond point to engrave one's glasses either as a gift or for one's own pieces. Some of them quite accomplished in their swirling interlaced script like this one. Large glasses like these were intended not for personal use, but for communal drinking at festive gatherings, as seen in this detail of the Merry Company painted by Peter Coda in the gallery. Passing the glass around may now seem hazardous to us, but quite prevalent then, in part of a convivial spirit that was thought to connect the Dutch to an ancient past recorded by poets like Martial. Coda's painting also details this lavish sideboard with nearly identical printed glasses haphazardly on their sides, perhaps suggestive of the rancor of the party. But also present are more traditional signs of material wealth, silver and silver gilt vessels. For the case in the gallery, it was gratifying to balance the display of glass with a fine example of Dutch silver, this beaker engraved with scrolling interlace birds and fruit. Still lives also depict contemporary cutlery, with the artist painting a knife angled out to create a convincing moment of foreshortening, a play with perspective in the picture plane, or balanced at the edge of a table, as we see here. One of our with Peter Klesch here, uses a knife. So this knife, he actually signs the still life. It has a P and a C for Peter Klaas. And that's very much like the monograms or maker's marks used by bladesmiths, as seen on the base of the blade on the display, the cutlery on display. Now, our ivory handle cutlery dates later in the century, but carries on the theme of sensuous pleasures at the dinner table. Another great moment of resonance between our collection of glass and our genre paintings is this by the playful artist Jan Sten in this family concert. Sten is depicting one of these burgeoning families that has wealth, but perhaps not the good manners that should go with it. And the man strumming on the lute and kicking back literally with his high-heeled shoe, dangerously near this delicate empty flute glass. And in the window is yet another filled with beer. At the time of the painting, 1666, these tall flutes were high in fashion, if not challenging to drink from. They augmented the visual experience of the carbonic acid in the drink with a long view of the tiny bubbles floating up to the top. This glass, so delicate, I confess terrifying to hold considering its age, is further decorated with an engraved Dutch coat of arms, the typical Dutch lion, the heraldic symbol of the New Republic. And lastly, when thinking about applied arts or decorative arts in the Dutch 17th century, blue and white ceramics come to mind. The major industry in the city of Delft, where this terrace scene was also likely painted, gave rise to the term Delftware for this commodity exported all over Northern Europe and even into the Americas. We can see it is present as a jug or covered pitcher sitting on the table in the center of the painting. The glistening white and blue glaze unmistakable. Like our bottle, the form of the jug is certainly European, but the color scheme is an imitation of Chinese porcelain. Chinese porcelain, like the small, delicate bowl displayed in the case aside this much heavier bodied Delft bottle, was imported in massive numbers by ships from the Dutch East India Company. This middle and upper class clamor for this precious material, and I hope the display in this case helps suggest why were they so after these beautiful fine porcelain bodied wares. It's the finest, it's almost translucent nature of the white glazed porcelain is sort of a wonder beside the Delft bottle. The bowl might not be the most valuable object in the gallery, but its imported serene delicacy speaks of the global market of the Dutch, the global market the Dutch had entered. It objectifies and shows the massive impact it had on their own material production, as well as the very commodity that brought them wealth as they took on the sea with their merchant enterprises and exploitations. And with that, I pass the baton on to Jamie.
Thank you, Jacquelyn, and thank you, Jonathan. Since this was my first reinstallation of works on paper in the Dutch galleries, I'm very excited to share some of my thinking behind the process and some of the special considerations I have to keep in mind as a curator of prints and drawings. Because of their sensitivity to light, works on paper can only be shown for a maximum of 6 months every 5 years. They're hung in the corridors because the galleries don't have skylights, so we can control the light levels to which the works are exposed. But this still means that the plus or minus 80 prints and drawings that are on view in the corridor galleries at any given time in our museums must change every 6 months. This ongoing work requires a lot of planning and collaboration, but it also gives us the opportunity to showcase the depth and variety of our collections and to respond to the paintings and objects on view nearby in different ways, either by making connections, by highlighting contrasts, or by broadening the range of subjects and genres on display. One of the simplest connections that can be made is between the paintings in the corridors and prints and drawings is showcasing works by the same artists. This was the case with Adrian van der Stade, who, in addition to being a painter, was also one of the most significant Dutch etchers of the 17th century. By showing different facets of an artist's work in painting, drawing, or printmaking next to each other, I hope that their versatility and range will come to light in immediately apparent ways. Another approach is to respond to works on view in the corresponding large galleries, expanding upon a particular aspect of an artist's work. In this case, or in the case of Rembrandt, the richness of our collection in this area allows me to think thematically and explore a particular aspect of the artist's work. The group of prints we just installed, for example, all share a concern with the effects of light breaking through the dark spaces. Some of them are aptly known as his dark manor prints. Rembrandt began exploring strong chiaroscuro effects in his early prints, and from the outset on an ambitious scale. The beautiful Descent from the Cross that I'm showing you is a famous early instance of this interest, but also a witness to the challenges Rembrandt faced in his quest for dramatic effects of light. The print on view is called the second plate because in his first attempt, the sheer quantity of lines so densely packed together caused the etching ground to break down, and acid disfigured the surface of the copper plate. And the result of this misstep can be seen in this haunting, rare impression of the first discarded plate that's in Amsterdam. Despite these challenges, Rembrandt's interest in chiaroscuro only increased, and some of his most famous later compositions are constructed around light-piercing darkness. On a smaller scale than the Descent, and almost 20 years later, is the famous scholar in his study, the so-called Faust, an enigmatic image in which divine revelation takes the symbolic form of light bursting through the shadows. Conversely, the disappearance and obfuscation of light could also have powerful symbolic force. Rembrandt's various reworkings of the Three Crosses, perhaps his greatest print, made the composition increasingly darker. In this later state, the banks of shadow, made of vigorous vertical hatching, appear to close in on the little light that remains around Jesus as he is about to breathe his last breath. Earth is about to be engulfed in darkness. The theme of Jesus as the light of the world returns in this remarkable adoration of the shepherds, made a few years after the Three Crosses. In this small plate, in which the figures barely emerge out of the shadows, Rembrandt pushes the medium of etching to its atmospheric and tonal limits. It is a remarkable feat, and one that really rewards close looking in person. Even with a small number of objects, my hope is that visitors will be able to see and chart Rembrandt's artistic journey with particular themes and painterly effects that he was trying to achieve in the linear medium of etching. Looking ahead to strategies for future rotations, I'd like to preview a couple of examples. New acquisitions often provide the impetus for choosing what goes on view, and this recently acquired quite incredible allegorical engraving by Jan Muller after Cornelis van Haarlem will not only connect with the painting Jacquelyn just acquired, but also will be the centerpiece for a selection of Dutch Manorist prints, discussing their refined allusions to classical tradition and the past, as well as their extravagant eroticism. Old acquisitions can be similarly inspiring. Almost 100 years ago, the Art Institute received a large gift of prints by Cornelis Fischer, a highly talented 17th century printmaker who has the additional distinction of having engraved the cutest cat in the history of printmaking. This large group of prints, mostly made up of brilliant early proof impressions, covers a wide range of subjects and genres. Works by Fischer will converse with the paintings on view, for instance, with his work by Van Ostade, or allow a broader exploration of the important genre of single figure portraiture in Dutch art, perhaps by pairing Fischer's sensitive study of the head of an old woman and his brilliant portrait of Lieven van Coppenol, both drawn from life, with the painted portrait by Weenix of the same period, a work which has also recently emerged from storage and is rightly enjoying renewed attention. I should stop here and open it up to broader discussion, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Jamie, for those illuminating commentaries on your installations. I think the installations look wonderful. Not only have we rotated objects and brought in new objects, but we have changed the wall colors. Really, these spaces have been refreshed, which would suggest that everything went beautifully. But I imagine that there were probably some challenges on both of your ends in terms of bringing these works into the galleries. Would you care to elaborate on what one of those challenges was for you?
I'll leave it to Jamie.
In my case, since I was relatively new to the Art Institute, before I started 2 weeks before the closure, I started planning the selection of prints, of Dutch prints that would go on view before plans for the refreshed look and the reinstallation were solidified. So a lot of things changed during the almost 2-year process between first planning and realization. But I think what made it possible and successful was the fact that we do collaborate quite closely, and we are in communication about what each other are doing and thinking about those spaces. So there is a degree of flexibility that is sort of inbuilt.
Yeah, and for applied arts, I was just so excited. A lot of these pieces have not been out in decades, particularly the glass, and some of the Delftware plates have been out before. Again, it would have been over 7 years ago or 6 years ago, and so it was an opportunity to get pieces that really haven't been seen in a while. But we do have a phenomenal collection of early glass here at the Art Institute. We have the what was known as the Museum collection of glass, which was largely split between us and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Ours was acquired by the Rosenwald as a gift for our museum, and so it was hard to pick. We do have a little bit of depth there, but we couldn't fill the case with Dutch glass of this period. So cherry picking the best, and of course we always have other examples that you can see online. But these 3 glasses just really spoke to me, and I felt like they made a wonderful little triad in there, but also spoke to the paintings. So that it was a little challenge to pare down the grouping and understand how best to discuss applied arts at this time, which again is so rich at the time, just as the paintings are.
And for my part, the Dutch global activity or global project is such a part of its history. We don't have a lot of paintings that speak directly to that component of Dutch history. And so how to tell that story without the visual material? This is something that curators are reviewing and struggling with around the world. I am working with a graduate intern who is helping me to devise an interactive to further expand upon this particular narrative. So there will be hopefully something in the gallery in the near future that will address this issue more directly. And in terms of exploring your collections and doing a deep dive into them, has this project sparked future ideas for acquisitions? Did you realize that we are really lacking something that you would have liked to have put into these galleries?
Yeah, I mean, we have a wonderful example of an engraved silver Dutch beaker that I did put in the case, but I really wish we had more depth in that area. The still lives display these wonderful silver gilt objects, these tatsis, these shallow bowls, and other pieces, mounted glass, silver gilt. And that's an area I wish we could go towards someday in the future, find a really beautiful piece of 17th century Dutch silver gilt or silver object to further show this incredible materiality of this time. So that's definitely something I think is on my department's radar.
Jamie?
I think it has been interesting to see the paintings that you selected for the galleries and to dive into the collection with that in mind. And I think, you know, obviously we have a wonderful Rembrandt collection, and that's always sort of easy to please. But I think I would like to build on the Dutch Manorist print collection, of which historically has not been collected very strongly at the Art Institute. So that's on the sort of the wish list is more Dutch Mannerism, and perhaps also vanitas prints, sort of printed still lifes and printed vanitas themes, as well as landscapes. So really things that can speak to the painted works on view as well.
Well, we'll have to keep in touch about still life. That is one of the top things on my list. If I could get a very nice Rachel Rausch or Maria van Oosterwijk, beautiful floral still life, I would be delighted. And what about future projects, perhaps? Has this spurred you to think in new ways or given you ideas for perhaps exhibitions that you might be thinking about?
Well, actually, Jacquelyn, as you know, and if you go into Gallery 213, you may notice there is a door that is locked. There's a plug in a space. We have Applied Arts of Europe has a very small 11 by 17-foot gallery space in there. Stay tuned. We have ideas for this space, a few different ideas. One that we're cultivating in conversation, actually, of course, with you, Jacquelyn, is thinking about furthering the idea of domesticity in the Dutch Golden Age. If you visit our Gallery 234 of Applied Arts, the Smith Gallery, you'll see that we have a Dutch cost, the gift of Tina van Lent Radler, which we're very grateful to have that gift about 4 years ago, I think now. And it's probably an Amsterdam cost from around the 1640s, this large oak cupboard, which would have held the household linens. And we might try to actually move that into that space, which feels like the sort of spaces you would have experienced the cost in, although tight, like an Amsterdam row house. And we also might collaborate with our textile colleagues because we have a number of Dutch Golden Age linens. And that's another aspect of what they were known for. If you look at the Still Life by Klaus, we have this beautiful damask linen in there. And so we have a number of these 3 or 4 linens that we could rotate together with the cost and give you that little snapshot. And I think, Jacquelyn, we were talking about possibly resurrecting a picture that shows domesticity, but we'll see. We have other ideas too about that space, but we're hoping in the next maybe 9 months or so, we'll be able to coalesce that in the future. So yes, please stay tuned to that space just off of the gallery where the Rembrandt is.
Jamie, do you have any thoughts? Have this spurred you to perhaps think about an exhibition or other project?
Well, I've been definitely interested in seeing what, you know, the objects that Jonathan selected and what caught his eye in paintings as well. And I am interested in sort of looking at our ornament print collection and perhaps,
yes, please,
thinking about collaborating more with decorative art or Applied Arts of Europe on decoration, which is a language that really migrates from surface to surface and transcends the traditional media boundaries.
I can imagine the beaker spoke very clearly to you, Jamie. I mean, that's almost straight from certain print sources, engraving that was floating around at the time, which is really beautiful about that beaker. I should add one little detail about that. The underside of the beaker has several names on it. I'm actually forgetting their names, but they have 18th century dates. And what I love about that in Amsterdam as well, it gives you a little picture that this object was cherished in a family for many generations and passed down multiple family members, and each one of them put their date on it in the 18th century. And I love these lives of the objects and this love of materiality in this period. And it is nice to be able to come together with both of you in the print culture, looking more at, the prints that created, ornament for these objects, especially silver, but also how they're depicted in the paintings. And people are really obsessed with the materiality. And it's not enough just to have the objects, you have to have paintings of the objects to celebrate it as well. I don't know, it's a lot.
Thank you both. I think it's time for us to switch to the Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. We are getting tons of amazing questions from the audience, so I will just jump right in. First question, what accounts for such a high concentration of fine artists in Holland during the Golden Age?
Shall I take this one? Or well, I think it has much to do with the burgeoning economy. To condense the history down to a very concise statement, in the 16th century, Antwerp was the great port of Europe. In the 17th century, it was Amsterdam. And with that amount of trade comes immense wealth. And I think that there was not only an attraction to the market, so the potential there to be successful, but there was also a growing collecting culture as well. Those two came together, and as the cities doubled, tripled in size over the century, you had clusters of artists and artisans working together. So I think there were numerous factors that made the New Republic so attractive. And this was very different than what we saw in much of Europe. The Protestant Calvinist church in the Republic was not one that commissioned artwork. So we don't have enormous altarpieces as you will see next door in Gallery 211. We have smaller works that were commissioned generally for the domestic context, for civic contexts. And so this too, it was a different type of market driven so much by this burgeoning mercantile class.
Yeah, it's sort of an example of if you build up this massive world of middle class and upper class, they will come. The artisans will come to feed them. And I think that's also true in the applied arts. You have glass houses growing in the middle and even earlier in 17th century, the Delftware industry, all of this, I think you see artisans migrating actually from the Spanish Netherlands, from Brussels, from Antwerp and places like that. And maybe because of religious persuasion, or just maybe because the economy was stronger and you had better work, you had more work, you moved and you brought the technology with you, or spurred on by those who were more homegrown. But I think that it's sort of like a perfect storm all coming together to create a difference in society.
Thank you. And I think somewhat related, this question, could you further discuss how the colonial past is addressed in the display in the new gallery?
Well, as I mentioned, there is not, other than the Collier still life, much of an overt reference to that. But scholars are quite open about the fact that there are echoes, if you will, of that appear in what we would think of as conventional landscapes, still life, etc., that we don't necessarily register in our 21st century perspective. So I'm working with my graduate intern to tease out some of those mirrorings, if you will. So for example, I know she is quite keen to feature part of the watermill in Meindert Halbema's great watermill with the red roof, because even in Dutch Brazil, they use such watermills in the harvesting of sugar. And so even though we don't have a representation, for example, by Frans Post of one of these sugar mills, we can make reference to it using our Halbema painting.
And I think your general text panels, Jacquelyn, that you've beautifully written for, I think, Gallery 213 or 212, they do address some semblance of colonialism and indeed also the slave trade, I believe you mentioned briefly. And it is manifest in almost many things. If you if we had a period ebony frame, we know that that is a product of colonialism. The ivory gripped knife and fork that we have in our case, that is a product of colonialism. That would have been an African elephant tusk that would have been brought into Antwerp, excuse me, not Antwerp, but more likely Amsterdam, and used. But it's there. It does need to be teased out, though. It is sort of beneath the surface. And our text does try to call out some of this. For sure, we need to.
Thank you both.
I think you can say the same of the print collections, which maybe do not address the subject explicitly, but some of Rembrandt's prints, for example, are printed on Japanese paper, which was newly available in Amsterdam thanks to the East Indian Trading Company. And but we're also trying to sort of point to this sort of expanding early global world that the Dutch were facing, perhaps with rotations thinking about the depiction of non-European peoples in Dutch art at this time, of which prints and drawings has probably more examples than other departments.
Thank you. Jamie, a pretty specific, several specific questions about the Rembrandt etchings, and wondering how long those will be on display. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, so the those prints, like every other work on paper in the museum, will be on view for 6 months. And it is our policy to display prints for a maximum of 6 months every 5 years. And that is to limit the damage that light causes to the works and to prolong their life and their conservation for as much as possible. Part of the decision to pull out some of our best Rembrandts was to celebrate really the reopening of the Dutch galleries and share these incredible riches of our collection with the public. So it's been really a pleasure for me, but unfortunately it is a time limited one, so it changes every 6 months.
But then new things will be on view, which is always nice. This question is interesting. A guest is asking about what you mean by reinterpreting the works, and maybe you could give an example, perhaps something that surprised you or was a new frame of reference to share through this reinstallation.
I'm happy to take that. Well, the Adrian van Ostade, Man with a Tankard at a Window, was a really wonderful discovery. It's a small work on panel, excuse me, had been in storage for quite a while, but there is an engraving in reverse after it, dating to the 18th century by a French artist, Pierre Chenu, and it helped to substantiate that this work was in fact by the artist, Van Ostade himself, not by a follower, because there is a very legible signature in the print, and there are traces of that signature in our painting. So this helped to, in conjunction with establishing the style, is very much that of Ostade, helped to, shall we say, elevate the attribution. So that was a little win, shall we say, for the collection. And I think is a really great example of kind of revisiting and rethinking the collection.
That's so exciting. Thank you, Jacquelyn. Jonathan or Jamie, anything to add?
I think I saw there was a question that asked about rotating objects in the future. It's something we're thinking about. You know, I wouldn't say our, particularly our holdings of Dutch glasses is that extensive. You know, there's only a few others that are absolutely worthy to be on display. And I think we might think about that for sure, like some glasses being switched out here or there, you know, so stay tuned on this space, but of course, months and if at all, if it does happen. But, you know, we do have other holdings in Delftware as well. You know, we only have the one bottle in this case, but there is a massive vase with cover in Gallery 234, which is really the best piece in our collection. It's a stunning object. from the end of the 17th century. But, you know, by and large, this is the best that we have for sure, and I just think it has a synergy with the paintings, with the collection. That's what happens. So don't just go to the Dutch galleries. Do come to our Applied Arts of Europe galleries too, especially Gallery 234, and you'll see objects as well. I should say too that in the real distant past, back in the 1920s through to 1960, there was a Dutch period room, which had largely been deaccessioned. But I do have an image. I don't know if we want to put it up on the screen just so you all can see what was the past. But in 1924, there was, yes, this room. It was called the Frisian Dutch kitchen, as you can see. But we do have a large number of these Delft tiles still in storage. But by and large, this was mostly the 18th and 19th century, not the golden age, not the 16th and 17th century that we're talking about, particularly the 17th century. So we can understand why this moved on, but it's nice to have this heritage and to continue to show, again, some of these pieces and have the opportunity to do so. So that's my little plug for Applied Arts of Europe. Jacquelyn, Jamie, anything else you wanted to address?
I think in terms of you know, rediscoveries, every curator comes to the collection with different eyes, and every period has its taste. So the Cornelis Fischer group of prints that I described was donated in the 1920s, and I think for a long period in the 20th century they were not considered fashionable or worthy of being put on view. So the vast majority of them have never been on view. And this is really down to sort of, you know, museum curatorial trends and tastes. And for me, it's really exciting to find these and to have the motivation through these rotations to delve in the collection and find these pockets of things that are worthy of being seen and bringing them out back on view. So I find that process very exciting.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to conclude. Thank you all so very much. And thank you to our audience for joining us for the program today. The galleries discussed again are 212 and 213 on the second floor of the Michigan Avenue building. So we hope you'll come and visit soon. For more information on upcoming virtual events, please visit us online at artic.edu and look for our monthly e-news in your inboxes. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.